We're here for the City of Erie Historic Review Commission meeting. Today is April 1st. Can't believe it started moving that quickly. We'll start with a call this meeting to order with a roll call. Jean Craig Pepper?
I'm here.
Dave Brennan, I'm here. Mark Tannenbaum is on the way, so he's not here currently.
Melinda's here.
Melinda Meyer.
Here.
And Matthew Falcone is on the way, but he's currently not here. Is Jason Wazorek here? I'm not sure if anyone's online. I see Kathy's online. Anyone else online? I can't tell from here. It's Kathy. Okay, so Jason's absent, and Kathy is here, present. Okay.
Heather's here.
Yeah, and Heather's here. Yeah, actually, I was going to make that introduction.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, Heather, I just wanted to, of course, welcome to the Historic Review Commission. I know you've been here for a couple weeks already, so this is your first meeting, so we're excited to have you on board, and definitely we're looking forward to all the great work you're doing. It's already feels exciting to have you involved and just be, all the passion you're bringing to it so far. So we're excited to see where that takes us in the future. Okay, so the first item is the public comment. Is there anyone here for public comment? I don't see anyone but Kathy, but just making sure.
Just thank you for all you do.
Okay.
Thank you. It takes a lot of commitment and time.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. No one else is here, no one else is online because we're currently all live now, so we'll move on with the meeting minutes. Did everybody get a chance to review the meeting minutes?
Mhm.
And would anyone like to make a motion to approve the meeting
I
minutes?
move that we approve the March 4th minutes.
Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, Melinda will second.
Having said that, I did make note earlier to Heather that the draft provided to you does not include at the bottom the signature respectfully submitted. So I will add that for the final copy. So that's an addition to the minutes. It's an edit.
Okay, great, so we'll add that then. Okay, thank you. So we'll now, those in favor of the approval of the meeting minutes, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Hearing none, we'll pass the meeting minutes and move forward with the rest of the meeting. First on the agenda was old business, and we have the Historic Preservation Plan presented to Planning Commission on 19th and City Council on 3/20. Any discussion on that?
I did want to mention, I had a discussion with Jeff Kidder last week, and on page 80 of the plan, there were two paragraphs at the bottom that he revised. Some of the information was not accurate and did not give credit to Mr. Hagan. Also talked about some collaboration that is the structure, the way that this trust is set up does not include one of the entities that was in the draft plan. So we quickly made those edits that Jeff submitted to us, and Lakota changed the last two paragraphs, and then we uploaded the final draft again. So I told Jeff, basically that was, we didn't have, I asked him if he had any other edits at the time, and he said that was the biggest one at the moment. So we hope that the resolution will be passed at this Wednesday's council meeting. It's on the agenda to be approved.
Okay, great. Any other comments or discussion about the Historic Preservation Plan?
Do we have to be at the meeting, or?
No, Lakota Group, you don't have to be there, but Lakota Group presented 2 weeks ago to council, and they wanted a little bit more time to just review the document. So I'm not assuming that, I am assuming that there will not be any questions, but it might be, if there are, we might have to have a representative, maybe that's a good idea. If there are any questions regarding the resolution, to have someone either from the HRC or staff, city staff, be at that meeting to field questions or at least take them and get back to them if there are. But
The, no one from Lakota is going to be attending that?
no,
Okay.
the way that their contract was set up was that they would present at the planning commission, HRC planning commission, and the council, but, that we're in the process of, processing their last invoice, so they're really pretty much complete.
Okay.
In fact, this last edit was a little bit, was outside of the scope a little bit.
So will someone be there, or do we have to decide who could be there to answer any questions?
I think it might be a good idea to have someone, I'm sorry, you were asking me something about, it might be a good idea to have someone be present. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be, I'm off that day, so I don't know if Heather could go or someone from the HRC or two people could come.
Okay, I mean, I could probably, that's this Wednesday?
Yes,
This Wednesday?
Wednesday at, I don't know if it's a morning meeting or.
9, it's a morning.
It's a morning meeting. Oh, that's good. But I have not heard anything from council. I haven't had any questions, so I'm not.
Actually, I cannot be there, I already have a commitment
Okay.
for that time, I can't be there.
Wednesday. Oh, no, I can't be there.
Well,
I could go.
yeah, I mean, if we have questions and we can't answer, if Heather can't answer it at the moment, we'll have to get back. But I haven't heard of anything. Kathy, do you know if
No,
anyone
I
has
haven't.
asked any questions regarding, no?
Okay.
Assuming that we're gonna be able to pass it without that, but,
Yeah. If there's any questions, the sooner the better to,
yeah.
instead of at the meeting, but
Yeah, because
if they're at the
then-
meeting, then they're at the meeting.
Right, then we have
So.
to wait another 2 weeks.
Yeah.
to pass.
Did Lakota present at the 20th? Okay,
Yes.
so council has actually heard from Lakota Group.
Yeah, that's what I thought, okay, yeah.
Right.
That's what I thought. Okay, excellent.
Council was provided with a link to the draft several weeks before that meeting, but, with it being such a large document,
It's
yeah.
a lot to go through.
But I haven't heard anything, and hopefully it passes without any question, which that would be great.
Yeah,
But just in case, you're, yeah.
okay. And the next item on the agenda was just the official vote, as you just said, Jackie, is going to be at the April City Council meeting.
Yes.
So there's really nothing else to discuss on that subject. I think we're all set to move forward, and hopefully we get our questions answered and get it approved.
Yes.
So, okay. Well, let's move on to the next item on the agenda, the CLG mini grant design guidelines. I know there's been some information that was forward to us. If we, do we want to discuss that?
So, we did submit for the CLG mini grant for both C and D. The mini grant that was aimed towards design guidelines, as well as the CLG mini grant aimed towards the scholarship for our own HRC committee for training. Those were both submitted. Those grant submittals both went in on March 20th. I did informally hear back from the state that they did receive them. We did hear back from the state that they received the 2 mini grants on March 20th. We, however, have not formally gotten a reply. So I would expect that those would both come back to us soon with a yay or a nay. I don't anticipate any reason as to why they wouldn't be approved, but they were submitted. And I think it's pretty much a green light, and that they're just going through the formal process. And the design guidelines would be, maybe Jack, you can speak to that in a minute. The design guidelines were for a smaller amount. The scholarship for HRC training is also a smaller amount, and that would benefit our organization from a standpoint of having 4 different mini courses that would tie into historic preservation. What were some of the courses chosen?
Right, the one was for training for the board, HRC board. The other one was training for the historic preservation planner. And then there was another one that we chose, David, your.
Was it like a scenario, or was it the design?
It was it implementing
Implementing.
design guidelines?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. There's a series that we have applied for, that I think
Yes.
four-part series.
Yes.
And that grant was that $7,500?
It was either 5 or 75.
And then the design guidelines, that was a mini grant that we were looking at to possibly, create for the development of commercial design guidelines. However, it's probably not enough to do a full document. I did speak to Erie Downtown Partnership. The group that they used, which now the name is
Prospectus.
yes, thank you, out of Cleveland, is that
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Cleveland. I think the total was about, I think it was $100,000 for the commercial residential. I'm sorry, yes, for the commercial historic guidelines that they have. Does that sound right, Melinda? I think it was 100.
I was gonna say 75, but
Okay, somewhere in that,
Somewhere in
not
that
enough
range.
for what we applied for. However, Emily Fedco said that maybe we can reach out and talk with them and see if, I know we probably have to go out for an RFP, but at least see if that's a doable kind of add-on to what is existing for the time being. So, it's most likely not enough to create a full document for housing residential
Yeah.
historic, residential historic guidelines. So we should
We'll
know about
more,
that.
definitely by next month's meeting. We will have a formal update by the May meeting as to, I would anticipate by then, as to where we stand and what would be included with those and when.
Were those going to be in-person meetings? I forgot, or was it online?
I think they were virtual.
Yeah.
Virtual,
they were
okay.
virtual.
Yeah, it makes it more, economical that way, but that's good. Okay.
So I guess we sort of covered C and D
Yeah,
in response to the inquiry for C.
okay. Any questions or comments with C and D? No? Seeing none, we'll move on to new business. We have reviewed the draft version of the City of Erie HRC official use forms. Now those were sent out, and I know we had looked at an earlier version of this a while ago, and now they're updated. And in these updates, I don't know if you want to talk about this, Heather or Jackie, there were some comments that got to this point, so these are the latest, greatest forms that we've put together that we think covers a lot of situations.
That's correct. That's correct. So if you flip to the attachments, specifically, I guess it would be starting at the back of the second page, you'll see the historic nomination form, and these are very much in draft format. And I can't speak for Jackie, but I personally would love for our board's comments on these. A few of us have been working on these diligently. I know Matthew has provided some great content for these. And so if anyone has comments or would like to visually mark something up with the historic nomination forms, which is a 4-page document, which printed a little bit oddly. The historic review commission application for a certificate of appropriateness, or the actual certificate of appropriateness. If anyone has comments, now is a great time to discuss that, or to provide any visual markups and red lines that you might have.
If we were doing like a street or a block of a street, would each individual building have to fill this out?
Right here. There's an option for district or
There's-
structure, site, and object.
So what, with a district, who fills out the form?
at least one, so there are specific eligible nominators. So a property owner within a district can complete the nomination, in which case they would include information on all of the properties that they are proposing be included in the district.
But and do they need to ask the other people if they want to be included, or?
So the way the ordinance is stated is that there are specific, there are different eligible nominators, right? And then it also outlines the process once a nomination is submitted. So there is a notification, once the nomination is submitted, then that kind of triggers a sequence of other actions, which includes notification of other property owners and public meetings and things like that, so.
I wanted to make a few comments regarding the ordinance, because that's where I started to get a little hung up when reviewing the application. There's some language in the ordinance where I see that where I interpret it as every application has to be reviewed by the HRC. I think the template that you sent us, which was, or the example that you sent us that we built out as the application, or the one that we had, maybe it's the one that we had, it only, the HRC only was reviewing demolition, renovation, or new build. But in the ordinance, it sounds like it's all applications that are reviewed. That's my interpretation. I might be interpreting that wrong. There's also a few other things with the ordinance that I noticed. It's the zoning officer that approves these applications, but the way that we have it set up currently is that the historic preservation planner is approving and signing off. Now, if we were going to do that, which makes a lot of sense, I understand that, even though zoning officer is an enforcement officer, we either have to make a change, I imagine, to the ordinance, or make a change to the application so that we're in compliance with the ordinance. So those are some things that I was just noticing that I got hung up on when Heather was like, do you mind taking a look at this? So I don't know if you have other comments.
There are a couple of places within the ordinance that really should be revised. So the fact that there isn't a clear timeline or timeline for, so for overlay landmarks, sites, objects, we have, as a commission up to this point, since we've only had landmarks, we have actually been kind of treating them and or processing them as districts are to be processed, right? To some extent, right? So the nomination comes in, we review within 30 days, we make a determination, and then within 30 days, we issue a letter of recommendation back to the Planning Commission. None of that is actually outlined in the ordinance. So that probably should be made clear as far as, because we're very clear about, or at least the ordinance, which I think, and Kathy's on so she can kind of speak to this, that ordinance was actually adopted or modified, right, from another community's ordinance. But there's that. It's also incredibly vague, at least from my perspective, with what triggers review. If I was a property owner and I'm looking at kind of the description about when I need to submit an application for a certificate for appropriateness, that isn't necessarily clear to me. I think it defines it as major changes and then provides a couple of examples, but it doesn't necessarily define what a major or significant change is. And maybe that, I don't know, maybe that is documented somewhere else, but I think that pertains also to one of the challenges that our first landmark structure is experiencing, which is an issue around signage and whether or not that signage actually, that change needed to be reviewed by the HRC. And if you're looking at the ordinance, it doesn't necessarily spell out that signage is considered a major change and should be a application for a certificate for appropriateness needs to be submitted. So I think that either needs to be addressed, I would think, in revisions to the ordinance itself, or we develop partner policies. So I have, in looking at other communities, what they do, I have seen other communities develop specific policies around changes in signage. They've developed policies around like fencing, right? So none of that is laid out in the ordinance because that would be, you'd have a 90-page ordinance. It's something that you develop as a subsequent policy that is in alignment with the original ordinance. But I think if I was a property owner and I owned a landmark building, I wouldn't be sure at this point what would or would not require review by the Historic Review Commission, which I think we probably should address
Yeah.
at some point.
And I think the more we can allay people's fears, the more likely they are to be on board with what our project is. A lot of people say, well, if you get in the National Historic Registry, you can't do this and this and this. I'm like, well, that's not really true. But that's the impression that people have out there about being on these things. So I think anytime that we could provide language that would allay fears, irrational though they may be, they have them. And they would when we had the situation with Garden Court.
With the Garden Court, yeah.
I mean, the biggest thing was, they were like, well, we don't know what this means, and we're not gonna vote for something that could mean something else in the future. You're not telling us what this is. And they voted against it.
So I guess what I'm hearing is that, one, we should, if we're going to make an ordinance change, that would require to go through the process, right? Planning
Right.
Commission, then
Right.
the City Council. I think we need to start there. I mean, it sounds like that's where we should first look. Because right now, like I said, there are things in that application that are not complying, for a better lack of term, complying with the ordinance. And also, this partner policy, or essentially our guidelines, right? Part of it would be the guidelines, design guidelines, on top of that. Go ahead.
And see, Jackie, I can see like a design guideline for the front, like, let's say there's a building on State Street that has a new sign. So I would see that because you can see that from the street and it's the facade, that might have a higher priority than, let's say they cut a man door in the back of the building and you can't see it from the street. So
And that's
what,
something that should come with guidelines.
and that would be a guideline that would be, to me, understandable.
But I to follow up on what you were saying, I think that a revision to the ordinance is going to take quite a bit of time.
Yes.
While the revision to these documents can be near instantaneous. So I would opt to make changes to the documents to make sure that they're in compliant with the ordinance that we have in place now. And if there are changes to the ordinance that come later, we can make changes to these documents. But what we've seen is that this will apply for landmarks and maybe even apply for historic districts. It's something that's going to keep coming. So it's good that we can start, I think, putting some infrastructure behind it and clarity and having documents to support it. And then when we get to a point where we can make some changes to the ordinance because we've now been through, several years of implementing it, or that we can then go back and make another revision based on what we put into place or what council puts into place.
I have to go take a look at the ordinance again, but I thought we had a definition section, maybe I'm thinking of something else, where it did define some of this. But I'm guessing it needs further definition. Because if we had a definition section, and I thought it kind of covered it, but if we need to further explain in the application to really bring it down to, you know, into the weeds, and we need to do that.
Yeah, even, we kind of glossed over it earlier, but even giving a little bit more specificity to who can be a nominator. It's very clear in a district who can be a nominator, but just for individual landmarks, really it specifies it's either owner or HRC, and there's also within the ordinance kind of the ability for folks from council, you know, to initiate this. And being able to have something in the ordinance that kind of really takes it down to a little bit more specificity. So something that would say, you know, that the mayor, members of the planning commission, members of HRC, members of city council, because you do need somebody to be the initiator, and especially when you're looking at government, it's kind of one entity with many voices. And so, especially with this process, you know, to have, let's say, if council were to initiate something, and then it would come back to us and then go back to council. So you definitely want to make sure that there's kind of a linear process in all of this. Yeah.
So I'm trying to think of the best way to accomplish this. Because we have the ordinance, there's certain parts that may or may not, you know, we may not want to go there, but do we just take these documents and refine them further? And, you know, how do we do it? Do we have a committee meeting to kind of review that and make a recommendation to the group, or any other ideas on, because we should do this pretty quick, even though it's
Or
not.
maybe do like we had talked about, gosh, mine's really loud.
That's just you.
I'm having to I'll put it further away. Maybe for our May meeting, or if that's not soon enough, we could certainly have a special meeting. But would that be something that, like, we could meet at noon and hammer that out in May before our meeting? Or do you think we need more time?
So that's the question. You know, I know Matthew mentioned it's going to take some time. But I know I think we each kind of know what kind of should be in there, but we just need to get the definite language and make it right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds maybe just for these documents, it sounds like staff, and I'm looking to Lilian, you know, could take this back and make the adjustments that you mentioned before to make sure it's in compliance with the ordinance. And, you know, looking kind of larger picture, maybe we look to form either a committee or some kind of steering body, and towards the end of the year, kind of working with council's time frame to then make some recommendations about what could be changed in the ordinance, making it clearer. You know, kind of we'll divide it up into two separate processes. One that can be done within the next meeting, and then another that we can look kind of more towards the upcoming year to make those changes.
Yeah. Matthew, would you like to head the committee to review? I know you've already done some work on this. I'm just trying to get a head start.
I'm happy to be voluntold to do it.
Okay. Well, that'd be great. Would anyone like to assist?
Yeah, I'd be interested in that committee.
Okay. So again, maybe Heather, you could just send everybody an email with like the documents, and maybe even I don't know if this is going too far, but maybe highlight the areas that are in question, or highlight the areas that may need attention, and then the committee could review that and then come back to the group. But we could all be looking at the document at the same time, so we're all up on the latest.
Thank you.
We could have a discussion for the May meeting, we would be looking
Yeah,
at.
yeah.
Sure.
So at the May meeting, you know, again, we could meet at you know, Matthew mentioned maybe possibly at noon ahead of the meeting to have any other discussions. Again, that'd be an open meeting, but it would just be before a regular meeting. To have a specific discussion about that. Does that make sense, Melinda? or-
I
Mark?
think in the meantime, and correct me if I'm wrong, Matthew, but in the meantime, we could adjust the application to comply with the ordinance so that.
As it is now.
Well,
Yeah.
as the ordinance is now, correct. So for instance, you know, the signature, the approval would be the zoning officer, because that's what the ordinance says and not the preservation planner. Small changes like that.
Yeah.
we could do that, Heather and I could do that, and we could send that out for review, and then at the May special, or, special working session or whatever, we could look through the application, and then we could also potentially talk about ordinance changes at that meeting if necessary.
Okay.
I'm not sure if what Melinda said about specific policy is that, if that's something that you'd like us to look at, other examples in other cities of what we might be able to capture and possibly discuss at that May meeting as well.
Yeah, it just depends. So other communities, what I've seen, just again, kind of in looking at what other HRCs are up to, there have, in addition to design guidelines, there have been kind of specific policies created around what appears to me to be items that probably have encountered questions, right? So I have seen that a number of other HRCs do have kind of like specific policies which exist even outside of design guidelines with regards to signs, because signs, not only do they, the city already has zoning related to signage. So we, as part of the overlay, then are creating kind of an additional layer of rules by which the property owner would need to adhere. And so, again, these may be separate policy documents, but I can certainly send examples of what I've found that have, again, been created outside of specific design guidelines. And I too would be happy to serve on that committee.
Okay, great.
So
is
are
there-
we
is there
gonna
a
try and
specific-
meet before the 5th, or what is our next meeting, the May, what?
And this, just so I have it correct in the minutes, we're talking about specifically a meeting to address revisions to the documents?
Application,
Okay.
the application.
Certificate.
And ordinance,
And the instructions, the
yes.
instructions that accompany the,
I think May 6th is the
May
next
6th is a
meeting.
Monday.
It's May 6th?
It's a
Okay.
Monday.
So do we want to convene before May 6th, or just have the first meeting at noon on May 6th?
Let's do the latter. Because if there's going to be three of
if
us,
there's
it's
three
enough
of
for
us, it
quorum.
has to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, so,
Okay.
we,
All right.
what we would need to do then is,
Be here at noon on the 6th?
yes,
Got it.
for a special meeting of the HRC, which will last from noon until 1.
Okay.
And then the regular HRC hearing will start at 1 o'clock.
But in the meantime, we'll review the documents and just,
And
have those ideas ready for discussion.
Yes.
Okay.
Kathy wants to say something, yeah.
Kathy, were you gonna speak?
One second, Kathy, we can't hear you.
You have your phone, right?
Okay. Yeah, just in case.
Yeah.
She's good?
Go ahead, Kathy, go ahead. Oh, we can't hear you.
You need her to try one more time? Kathy, try one more time speaking, please. Nope, we cannot hear you.
Sorry?
Everything's set up on this end, so.
Is it something on this side at all? No, okay. Oh, maybe that works.
Oh, something happened. Kathy, talk.
right.
There you go.
Excellent.
Thank goodness for technology.
We've connected.
Well, I saw a blue thing that wasn't there before, so I thought, well, maybe that's doing something.
Go ahead, Kathy.
That's my level of technology. The blue
I
things.
apologize, I should have checked when you started the meeting, if you could hear me, because I know we had technical difficulties in the past. I I just, I certainly appreciate all the comments and just wanted to kind of point out and clarify that as some of you who were there to help draft the initial language for the zoning ordinance, they remember when that was drafted, the city of Erie's planning department looked very, very different. We didn't have a preservation planner, so one was not recognized in the ordinance. And that ordinance language also is what created the HRC. So we had understood that once it was drafted and incorporated, the changes most likely would need to be made and clarified as we try to work with the ordinance. So it's not surprising to me that now that you're in the throes of administering the work of the HRC that you're finding inconsistencies. But I just wanted to kind of clarify and kind of remind us where we started, and that was the ordinance that created sort of everything that you have now before you. So I'm glad you're working through some of the kinks and going to work on refining some of that language. And I agreed with what Melinda was suggesting, that policy, management administrative policy is probably also an excellent place to start, because there's going to be things that you don't anticipate coming up, and how you process requests, the whole idea of who's eligible to nominate. We kind of stretched out that the HRC is an arm of the city council, and therefore would be an eligible body to submit nominations. Particularly once your planning or your preservation plan was complete, we knew there'd be recommendations that came out of that plan that you would want to act on. Those would also include designation historic assets. So just wanted to add that context a little bit for you. I'm glad you can hear me.
Yeah, great, thanks, Kathy.
We are too.
Appreciate it.
So, may I make a motion?
Yes, please.
Mr. Chair, I move that we table the nomination application for certificate of appropriateness and the certificate of appropriateness for consideration at our May hearing. And as part of that, I also would move that we form a committee to review those that will meet at 12 o'clock on May the 6th and report back to the commission at our regularly scheduled meeting.
Okay.
I second.
Okay, we have a motion on the table and also a second. And just to clarify, the motion is to table these forms currently for now, and so we could make the revisions, changes, and also to form the committee to review and make recommendations at the next meeting.
That's correct.
Okay. And the second was Craig. Those in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Those opposed? Hearing none, ayes have it. It passes. Okay. We'll move forward to the next item on the agenda is the proposal to adopt the 2017 Secretary of Interior Standards with the treatment of historic properties, design guidelines for HRC decision-making until the City of Erie HRC design guidelines are fully in place. There's an attachment in the in our packet today. So any discussion on this proposal?
Can I make a comment on this? It was brought up or recommended that while we are currently lacking design guidelines that really apply to many of the decisions that we discuss and ultimately vote on here, that we, until design guidelines are put into place, use the Secretary of the Interior's design guidelines. Now, those are an enormous set of guidelines, and so you'll see the link under item B, and then just the printout of kind of that initial website the full, I guess it prints on the 4 pages of how those are used. It goes into the introduction. There's a part A or 1 and a part 2 to those. And so we're talking like hundreds of pages. So they're highly specific, probably more specific than what ours ultimately will be, but they were created with the capacity and the ultimate understanding that they would cover a diversity of topics. Many of which we will never see probably in Erie, based on the size of our city. But until our design guidelines are in place, we have the proposal to adopt those formally until that point. So that's just kind of my input on that.
Okay.
Discussion?
I think that's understandable. Gives us something to work with until we have something else to work with. But
It's a
right
good
now, I don't
bridge.
think we have enough to make a decision. Some things we don't know how to make a decision.
Okay. Any other questions or discussion?
I think it's a great idea.
Can I ask a question? If a local municipality adopts state design guidelines, is there any legal standing that you have to abide by? I don't know if that makes, if the local municipality is governed by those guidelines. I'm just asking if, I want to make sure that if we adopt those, that we are.
It could be a package deal. Yeah.
Does that make sense, what I'm asking? I mean, I just.
Did you say, what, for construction guidelines, or?
Like, is there any, if a local government is adopting state historic design guidelines, is there any, are you held to a different standard, or is there any legal sort of expectations around that? And I don't know if we can answer that now, but I mean, it might be a good idea that we know that going into this by adopting state guidelines.
Well, wouldn't
I
anything,
mean, there are guidelines.
wouldn't anything go through the Bureau of Historic Preservation? So, and these are their guidelines, their
Right,
guidelines
and their
are
guidelines.
the Department of Interior's guideline.
Right.
I was going to say, just for clarification, these are actually the federal.
Right.
No, that's, yeah.
Well, that makes it even higher then.
Well, and actually it's quite common for programs to adopt specifically the secretary, and this is in part, why they were created to establish like federal guidelines, right? So guidelines nationwide with regards to the treatment of historic properties, and communities and programs all across the country use this as a baseline. I mean, we ultimately want to develop our community-specific design guidelines, but in the absence of those, it makes sense to utilize these design guidelines. And if I could also plug, since you mentioned the Erie Downtown Partnership, so when Perspectus was working on the development of the design guidelines for that commercial district, the first historic preservation planner of the city, as well as at least 2 or 3 of our HRC members participated in that project steering committee and or advisory committee. And the intent really was from the beginning that the hope was that those design guidelines that were developed for the commercial corridor where the Erie Downtown Partnership operates, that those would ultimately be reviewed and considered by the Historic Review Commission for adoption for the commercial design guidelines citywide. So I just want to, again, I know this has been mentioned multiple times throughout the last 2 years, but just, again, want to go on record as that was one of the intents of that project, that it would create a set of commercial design guidelines that could be used citywide, even though it was an Erie Downtown Partnership-led project.
So, just like our neighbor we would first and foremost get it on the agenda,
Mhm.
right, at the planning commission.
Mhm.
So, that's something that, I don't know if you have to vote on it, or if you would have to have Erie Downtown Partnership come and present that to the HRC, and then you would vote on it to then go to the planning commission, but I'm not sure.
Lots of bumps on this recording. No, not unless they are a local historic district. So if they're not, then it wouldn't be within our purview to issue guidelines for them. So if they would not like to become a local historic district, then it seems like the most appropriate kind of avenue would be the planning commission. Although if they do, then we could very much look to adopt those as their formal guidelines for their specific district.
Yeah, and I would say that before we look to adopt those commercial guidelines, we obviously have new HRC members, and/or we have HRC members that didn't participate in that, in the development of those design guidelines. So I would say there would also need to be, like, we would need to have a review period for the HRC members to review those guidelines, determine, yes, whether or not we would want to adopt them as the citywide commercial design guidelines. The plus, the positive to this is, because this was a planning process led by the Erie Downtown Partnership, and the project was funded in part with Keystone Historic Preservation and Planning dollars, there was a pretty intense public engagement process. So the commercial design guidelines that were created with public input. So I think we may want to have a conversation about, so not only would I would think the HRC members that didn't participate in that planning process, they would need some time to review that document. We would also want to have a conversation with either the Erie Downtown Partnership or Prospectus about, do we want to solicit funding to modify that document so that it, like right now, the document actually reads as the Erie Downtown Partnership design guidelines, right? So if we were to adopt that, we'd probably want to edit that document and/or create a separate document that houses that original design guidelines that would be HRC that approved, and then we'd have to go through that approval process, right? So, but again, it's a ready-made document, and I think
The downtown Erie, the Erie downtown document.
the Erie Downtown Partnerships
Yeah,
design
right.
guidelines, yes. So that's it's a
you're-
great document to start with.
Do we have copies of that now?
They are available online, and so the Erie Downtown Partnership does have their design guidelines document available through their website. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay.
It's not always easy to find the updated version, so we'll send out a link to the HRC. We'll start there.
But that's one of the reasons why what we've been talking about and we're focusing on has really been the residential design guidelines, because again, the intent was to utilize this amazing planning document that has already been created with public input. It reflects the architectural styles that you see in the city of Erie's commercial corridors, and completely just lost my train of thought.
Well,
Forgot
it wasn't commercial, it was more residential when we started.
But that's yes, so that's why we were focusing on soliciting funding for the residential, because these other really good other really good document already exists that we could modify and
So
adopt.
are you proposing to change, there's a
I am
proposal
not.
kind of on the,
So no, we've got yes, so I think we do still want to put forth a motion, and that's I'll put forth a motion that we adopt in lieu of other design guidelines at the moment. I think we're, yes, motion to adopt the Secretary of the Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties. and/or rehabilitation of historic properties. Okay, end of motion, sorry.
I second the motion.
There's a second, okay.
Okay.
Okay, those in favor? Aye. Say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Hearing none, this passes. Okay?
And then I think as follow-up, we begin the conversation about the commercial design guidelines available to us through the Erie Downtown Partnership. Review those as HRC members and
And that would be a nice segue into talking perspectives about
yes, it would.
residential.
Yes, it would.
So, perfect. Yeah, okay.
Okay, sounds good. We'll move to the next item here, which is the sponsor recommendation of the local landmark, Erie Federal Courthouse Complex, 17 South Park Row, includes the Federal Building, U.S. Courthouse, Erie Public Library, and Baker Building. Matthew, I know, thank you for sponsoring the tour today, for setting it up. If any discussion to start this off?
Still in awe of what we saw and just how much of the interior. And I know interior space is not something that the Historic Review Commission, it's not a part of our purview at all. But it was amazing to see how well the federal government has really taken care of 3 cherished landmarks for Erie. Even seeing in the pieces of the Isaac Baker Building, still carrying through some of its history is absolutely fantastic. So, no comments. I'm happy to, there's a presentation that's before you in the packet. It's typical when landmarks are kind of brought before the commission that staff brief us. I know we're in a really exceptional place because we have brand new staff, and this landmark came to us kind of before we were able to have everybody on board. So I think Heather and I would like to jointly kind of walk you through the presentation that's before you here, so we have a very clear understanding of what's before us and how to move forward.
Okay.
So if you would indulge us.
Please.
So the complex itself, as we all know, is 3 individual buildings. It's the library building, the courthouse building, and the Isaac Baker building. The nomination, as we put it together, is very much kind of a bit of a hybrid, because even though they are 3 individual buildings, they are technically one. They have been connected by a modern addition and are seen as one kind of city block in one building. But the narrative that was in the nomination addresses each of those individual buildings and their unique architecture, their unique history, and the people that were behind them. So for the history then, for a very brief overview, the U.S. Courthouse was constructed in 1937. The architect was Rudolph Stanley Brown, and it is the second building, I think as we saw today, on the site, and was a major WPA investment during the Great Depression in Erie. The Baker Building was constructed in 1947. The architects there were Walter T. Monahan and George Mayer. It's notable as the second building on the site as well, and only commissioned by the only one to be commissioned by the Baker family. The Erie Main Library was constructed in 1880 by the architectural firm of Alden and Harlow, which is of national prominence. It's notable because of its architects and the architecture that it employs, and it plays a significant role in Erie's educational and cultural history. And that brings us to significance. So when we're looking at these individual landmarks, we need to identify which specific criteria they satiate that's in the ordinance. And in this case, it's a plethora, and they kind of overlap with different periods and different criteria. So for the Baker Building, it is nominated because it is representative of broad patterns of development, heritage, culture of the municipality, commonwealth, or nation. So in this case, it's indicative of commerce within Erie. It's also associated with persons of significance, the history of the municipality, commonwealth, or nation. In this case, it would be Isaac Baker and the Baker family. And it also embodies distinctive characteristics of style, type, period, method of construction of architecture, in that it employs a streamlined, modern architectural style. The Erie Main Library is nominated under 2 criteria. It is the work of a notable architect, artist, craftsperson, or building, and that is Alden and Harlow Design, which is, again, a firm of national importance that has done some very exceptional work in Erie, Western Pennsylvania, and throughout the country. It also embodies a distinctive characteristics of style, type, period, or method of construction of architecture. I think we can all agree that the Renaissance revival employed in the building that is both expressed interior and exterior is absolutely astounding. And then finally, the U.S. Federal Courthouse is nominated under similar criteria, that it embodies distinctive characteristics of style, type, period, method of construction, and that it employs a modern architectural style. So with that, I will turn it over to Heather to provide formal staff recommendations to the commission.
Thank you, Matthew. So it is planning staff's recommendation to the commission to formally accept the nomination of these 3 structures now acting as one structure, and that they are an area of significance. And should I read through, should I include these, or are you gonna come back through? Okay. We're basing this decision on the fact that that they are representative of broad patterns of development, heritage, or culture of the municipality or commonwealth or nation. It is associated with persons of significance to the history of the municipality, commonwealth, or nation. It embodies distinctive characteristics of style, type, period, or method of construction or of architecture. And lastly, it is the work of a notable architect, artist, craftsperson, or builder. And we'll circle back by that next page. So it is, it's available that we, at this point, recommend these 3 structures now acting as one: the Erie Federal Complex, 17 South Park Row, as the U.S. Courthouse, the Erie Public Library, and the Baker Building as a local landmark.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. It's a lot of work put into that, and thank you for setting that up. Would someone make a motion to approve, or on the committee? Matthew? I don't know.
As a point of clarity, and I'm looking to staff here for this. So the nomination before us is that we are officially making a decision on eligibility. Is that correct? And we would also need to then make a second motion then to make a referral to city council.
Yes, so there's supporting the nomination and there's determining eligibility. That's, you're trying to have those 2, I believe.
We
Okay.
typically have put those together.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
We'll simplify it.
I just want to make sure that we have all of our T's crossed and I's dotted.
Yep.
No, it's,
You've done this before.
Yeah, the last 2 we've put together. So we've determined that the building meets the criteria for the program for the historic overlay.
okay.
And then we simply have included that. So we then also include in that motion to formally recommend to both city council and the planning commission. Don't forget that there's the planning commission in there.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, that is correct. That's what is in the ordinance as well for process.
With that then, and
Repeat what you just said.
yeah, can I just do quotation marks then? No, I appreciate the clarification and the guidance from Commissioner Mayer and from the 2 accused. So I move that we not only accept the application and that it meets several of our criteria for significance, but that we make a positive recommendation to City Council and to Planning Commission on its designation. Thank you.
Great. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, second is Craig. Those in favor say aye.
Yay.
Hey.
Yay.
Those opposed? Not hearing any, the motion passes.
Can I ask a question? On the map, it's only in red, because the new stuff, like the connector piece, and then the new buildings aren't individually, you know, the yellow, the blue, and the pink, but then like that connector, but we're not excluding that middle section that was modern, but it's really done a nice job of blending. But we're talking about the red square.
That's correct.
Okay,
And just to provide some orientation is why there are so many different colors.
that's fine. No, I like that part. But it's, I didn't know if we were excluding the new part that was added on.
No, it's included.
So
as
it's all the red, it's all.
All the red.
all the red.
Okay.
Yep.
Got it.
And the motion you just made was a designation for an overlay district. So I mean.
That's square.
Yes.
Yeah,
And
no
that's
doubt.
how PACA is.
We're multiple
zoned-
addresses. Mhm.
Zoned on the zoning map as an historic overlay district, so.
Yes.
Or historic overlay for historic structures, district sites, or objects. To be exact.
So there is kind of one point though that I included one or 2 points as follow-up, but I think that given our discussion earlier on in the meeting, we've kind of satiated the second point. For the first one though, when something is landmarked, where is it landmarked? So, you know, with looking again, like to the National Register, something, if it is listed, it's listed on the National Register of Historic Places. Can we then kind of solidify our nomenclature here as well, that if we're landmarking something, we are landmarking it to Erie's Register of Historic Places? Would that be appropriate?
It's on the zoning map, because it's part of a zoning.
So what you're proposing will probably help the public.
Yes,
Yeah.
very much so.
Because it could go on the City of Erie website someplace, a list, and and we could actually send somebody a certificate that it could be nice, and we
Frame or
could frame it
whatever.
and put it on the wall, which would be nice.
Well, it doesn't change the fact that this is an overlay, a
Correct.
zoning a zoning historic overlay.
That's what I was getting at.
Yes.
It doesn't change that. When talking with members of the public, right, when you start talking about zoning overlays, you lose them immediately. You see the fogging over. What? Yes. So what you're proposing is simply to help for us to kind of contextualize and/or identify for the public how this is going to be labeled.
Exactly.
Something along those lines. Yeah.
Melinda, that's a great point. So, you know, we're lucky enough to have a copy of the zoning ordinance that was published in July of last summer, 2023. And so, like with you speaking to this being an overlay district, having that be the visual on the zoning map would be, you know, the first step. And then having a landing page or a holding space on the city's site maybe that is possibly a sub-page to ultimately historic preservation, HRC work. So that is certainly a great suggestion, so that cohesiveness is the ultimate goal. And the way that we get there is through, you know, the webpage, online content for the greater public, this tie-in to the zoning document, right? And ultimately through something visually in person, where when someone's walking down the street, there's a placard or a sign. And so together that has like a 3-stage or 3-part, I guess, foundation to it.
And we could easily do like a dashboard on our
Yes,
landing
yes.
page, just like we're doing dashboards for everything else right now. We could do a historic overlay district dashboard that shows visually, it's visually appealing, it's easy to read, unlike the zoning map, which is very difficult to look at, and it's small. So that's something that I know Heather has talked about.
This is very common for communities. I mean, cities all across the countries have their own registers of historic properties. The state used to have, I mean, they don't anymore because of their own reasons, but Pennsylvania used to have its own register of historic places. This is, yeah, I mean, this is right in line with
And maybe
what
we
other
could-
communities are
oh, sorry.
doing. Nope, go ahead, sorry.
No,
Greg.
I didn't want to interrupt. Finish what you were saying.
Totally done.
Oh, okay. Maybe we could have a design for the verbiage, and if the owners wanted to, get a plaque or something, that it would be what we would want to say about it. I think that would be more popular with individuals than maybe commercial, but.
Yeah, so again, we've had this conversation. We had this conversation most recently, I think, last meeting and the meeting before. And then we also had this conversation, I think, a year ago, because I feel like now that things are settled, right? We've got some new staff in place, right? We are revisiting conversations that we started a year ago, and they may not have been addressed, but in any case, we have thrown out multiple times Lakeshore Industries as a potential fabricator. I'm just going to shift a different hat for just a moment. So we've had discussions within Preservation Erie about partnering with the city to implement kind of a broader historic marker and or plaque program, because Preservation Erie is doing historic markers, and we have a handful already in the city, but we'd like to continue that, and it pairs nicely with the plaques that would go with now the properties that are actually landmarked and or locally designated as historic overlays. So, but okay, switch back on to the commissioner's hat. But.
Melinda, on that note, is there an example or a visual regarding that? You said they're Lakeshore Industries, just since this is some new information regarding the placard. Is there something?
So I can send you information.
That would be great, just
Yes.
to kind of get the ball in motion.
Yeah.
Because we would
and
definitely do that.
to get up to speed.
Like
And
Packet would put it in our building.
from my perspective, why not, right? If it's not just a placard, but a placard might require far less input or decision-making than, series of forms or applications, things like that. Yes, the placard's important, but I would say if we could see that and get that moving ahead, I think that would be great. And especially that linkage to Preservation Erie and having a little bit of similarity there, I think would be great for the city overall.
Yeah.
May I ask how you fund that?
Well, I would say, I think there's a certificate, a piece of paper, the language, we get all the graphics set up.
Right.
But I think you could go and make a placard, but I don't think the city would pay for the placard.
Okay.
We'd put the design together, the certificate, and be able to give a certificate on paper, but I don't think we would go to Lakeshore Industries and pay for
Yeah.
a placard, because how much is that?
So.
We paid several $100s for our bronze
Yeah,
plaque.
yeah.
But even when we got on the national, they did not send us a bronze placard. They gave us guidelines and we had the thing
Yeah,
made.
how
Yeah.
to make
Yeah,
one.
right.
Yeah.
And we made
Which
it out
we
of
could
town,
do, too.
actually, yeah.
So I think
But-
we design and get the
Right.
language and design a certificate, give them a piece of
Right.
paper, then they could always get something made somewhere.
I think it was
wherever they want.
$500
Is
bucks,
that
actually.
Preservation Erie?
I was just going to say, but going forward, I mean, we could talk about a partnership. So Preservation Erie's historic markers were grant funded.
Okay.
And so the grant funding that we had secured, though, required a 50% match. So we worked specifically with property owners, neighborhood groups, other community advocates, so that Preservation Erie, we actually covered 50% of the marker, and then our community partner provided the other 50%. So, and we could talk more about that going forward, if there are ways in which Preservation Erie as a nonprofit could solicit funding, right? And could potentially continue to offer property owners a subsidy on a plaque. Right now, right, with the city as is, since we have two landmark owners in the room, they'd have to pay 100% of the cost of the plaques at the moment. So, but we could certainly have that conversation about what a partnership might look like. Can we solicit additional funding through grants and or a donation, and create a pool of funding so that we could discount the cost of the plaque for those who would be interested.
Okay. Anything else?
Can I make a motion then? To take it all the way back to the very beginning about the Erie Register of Historic Places. The just nomenclature. Is that something that we can move forward and kind of say that this is something that exists, and when we landmark something, we're putting it on this list?
Yes.
Do we have a definition, though? I mean, we would say we're going to create this list. That's what you're proposing to do. Okay.
Yeah, that if something is either a district or site, object, if anything is landmarked by the commission, by the city, then it is officially
Should be
listed.
cataloged.
Yes, on the Erie Register of Historic Places.
The only, and this would be for consideration for the commission, the only possible edit I might suggest is because everything in this blasted area is known as Erie, we may wish to say Erie City Register of Historic Assets or Resources, just to be clear that it's Erie City, not
Yeah,
Erie
well,
County.
this is a city body, right.
Right.
But
Quite like
other
that.
people are going to be looking at it. It's not just residents will be referencing or looking at the register. So again, only,
So,
That is a distinction, because
Right.
your Erie preservation is not restricted to just the city of Erie.
no, we were countywide.
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
countywide. So I think us specifying city of Erie historic landmark.
Yeah, that's all we can do anyway, so.
Yeah.
right. So I'll go ahead then. I absolutely agree. I love it. I move that we establish the City of Erie's Register of Historic Places.
Yes.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a second. Those in favor, say
Aye.
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 Those opposed? Not hearing none, the motion passes. Okay, thank you for that. Last time on our agenda is the PACA building tenant signage letter of non-compliance. I know we are sent over all the communications regarding that subject. I don't know if Jackie or if we have is anyone here to speak to that, or is it a general discussion on where we're going next?
Maybe I'll just hop in as to the sequence of the documents, as there's quite a few pages. So under new business, item D, attachment D. So the first document you'll see there is from the Chief Zoning Officer, Jake Welsh. It was dated January 25th. So the City of Erie Chief Zoning Officer sent the owner this letter on January 25th. If you flip that over, there's a planning review routing slip that was dated on mid-March with the description of the sign and the zoning fee, which I think was $50. The next page was the official application for the sign installation. That's dated March 1st. You'll see the owner's name at the bottom, the estimated cost of the sign, installed by Carr Electric. On the back page of that document, so the back-facing document is a visual with a photograph, kind of some side view sections and front sections that go through the components of the sign, what it's made of, how big it is, things like that. The subsequent pages include the owner's response back to the Chief Zoning Officer on March 1st from PACA and the owner at PACA. And that is it printed out as a 3-page letter. And then on the back of that is the chain of emails that just guides through the dates of mid-March, where the Chief Zoning Officer, Jake Welsh, responded back to the owner's letter mid-March with his recommendations, and Jake was following up on that. So That's kind of the sequence of the documents as they read in the packet. Jackie, do you want to speak to that anymore? So that's an overview of what we've included. And we posted it for discussion, just based on the fact that, we are operating under the zoning ordinance for the city of Erie, that PACA is a landmark building. But it appears that there was some non-compliance with some of the issues pertaining to the building and possibly the sign.
And I would note that going back to the ordinance and the vagueness or gray area that Melinda and I spoke about, that, this is why it's come to this discussion at this moment. So there's two sort of issues floating. And Mark, I don't know if you'd like to speak to this at all today, or if you have anything else to add to the documents that were provided here.
I think they stand for themselves. I mean, I don't want to sway the body, but I don't think it's an attractive sign. But at the same time, it's kind of a fait accompli, and I would be willing to. I put forward a middle ground, and I would be willing to do all that, and I would be willing to sign that
So
if that's what they offered.
So my question is, what could the HRC do? I mean, we have the ability to say, this is okay with conditions, or is it something that has to come from zoning, since it came, the directive came from zoning? Because we've never been here before, of course, with this with the new regulations and the violation, et cetera.
So I met with the chief zoning officer regarding this topic, and he and I really had the same idea that it needed to come to the HRC for discussion, because there's an aspect to the sign, the facade that faces State Street, that falls through the cracks a little bit, tying back into a little bit of the lacking language in the zoning ordinance. So he and I were of the conclusion that it needs to come to the board for discussion.
So we have the ability to recommend
Yes,
to the zoning, and then they take action?
that's my understanding.
Or do we
Was
have
this-
the final say? I'm trying to get at
Yeah.
who's, because we haven't
Was
been here
this all
before.
because they didn't pay the fee up front or something, $50?
They put the sign before the application.
Right,
Before
right,
the
okay,
certificate of
okay,
appropriateness application.
Yeah.
Which.
So has anyone
we didn't-
objected to the sign?
I mean, like the general public, or?
Well, no, is the zoning commission saying there's an issue with the sign other than it went up before they got their fee?
Well, it was supposed to go through the HRC review.
Oh,
And
okay.
approval process and permitting as well. So it is a zoning related in terms of it did not comply with the proper approvals and permitting, but also that because it is a locally designated landmark, it should have gone through the certificate of appropriateness application, which we didn't have in place at the time, and we still are. It's still in review. Although again, there's this gray area with signage and facade and all of that we're in the midst of essentially trying to piece this together. So
I was going to say,
Well, should we table this until we have a zoning ordinance? Or we come up with our own issues?
You took the thought right out of my head. I do think that, especially because we are still in the midst of working out the certificate of appropriateness and the application for certificate of appropriateness, we're not in a position to be able to have an informed discussion about this today. I think that we took a step in that direction in that we now have specific guidelines. in looking at the Secretary of Interior standards for treatment. Why don't we table this for a good long while? I think I'm thinking 120 days. That gives us 4 months basically to work out the remainder of the applications, and for the applicant to work then with you staff to come to a resolution, and then come back to the commission at that time, and we can have an informed conversation about this application.
And is that gonna increase a fine or anything?
Well, first of all, I did send in $100. I couldn't find how much the money was. It wasn't on the documentation to find it out, so I sent in $100. The tenant did it without I didn't even know that was happening. I came into work one day, there was a sign on the front of the building. So he didn't know it. He didn't know it required a sign thing, and of course I knew this was going to be a problem. So I did try to figure this out. I got the letter. I'm not upset by it. It's the way I understand that. I want to comply. I sent in the $100. It still does. I don't know where it says $50, but I sent in $100. I don't know if they cashed the check or not, but I sent in them a check. My willingness was to, since it's up already, and there are no guidelines, that I'm certainly willing to rectify the problem about the application. If it cost me twice as much money to do the application, then that's fair. I was willing to pay a fine. I suggested $500, which is a good hard fine. And my hope would be that there would be a lag time of 3 years. His lease runs out in 3 years. At that point, and I've talked this over with him, at that point, if he decides to stay in the building, then he'll have to deal with that, and whether we have to take it down and put it on the inside of the building and build another sign, then that's what we'll do. I think it's tough on him in this position to spend that money for a sign, although I know that shouldn't really be a consideration, and I understand that. But he's trying very hard to put this thing together, and he doesn't have a lot of resources, and he didn't know. And to make him take the sign down and then go through a bunch of other expenses seems to me to be too much of a penalty for missing an application over terms that we don't even know what they are yet. It is gray. So my suggestion was that we wait until he signs. Now, when he signs a new lease with us at PACA, that'll be part of the lease. And we'll be able to say, this comes down or you're moving. I hate to throw them out of the building over a sign. I think that's a bit extreme. And I'm willing to make sure that this is covered by his insurance policy, which he's required to have. I respect the fact that you don't want a sign to fall off the front of the building and whack somebody in the head. I get that. So let's make sure that we're covered for that. If the city engineers wanted to look at the bolting of, I think it looks fine. I'm not an engineer, but they did go up there with scaffolding and bolt it well. It doesn't.
Was there a question about it being secure?
I don't think there is, but I think one of the ongoing concerns of anybody putting a sign on the front of the building is that on the, over the sidewalk, and it's less than a foot. It's less than my sign, the sign that PACA has. I think that it is a concern that it would fall into the right of way. And that certainly signs, if we're going to talk about this in the future, certainly signs should be named in an insurance policy of a liability policy so that the city doesn't get financially responsible if, God forbid, a sign would fall off the front of the building and hurt a pedestrian, which it's unlikely, but it's not impossible. And the more signs there are, the more likely it becomes. So I think that having an insurance policy that specifically mentions the sign is germane and appropriate. And I think that I can get that accomplished quickly. So if there was a tabling, a somewhat understanding that we were going to re-look at this when the lease needs to be renewed, since it went up, and it's hard to make a law now and then retroactively push it back onto something. But at the time of renewing a lease, I think that that's a fresh start, and I would certainly put the tenants, I don't want to say feet to the fire, but make them responsible for whatever financial responsibility it is to change it, fix it, move it, whatever the city deems appropriate. But I will do what the city says.
Mark?
Yes.
Question. What is the What day was the lease signed, just from a standpoint of the 3-year mark, just so I can get this
I
on
can get
paper?
that. It's probably
Could you
in the
get that
summertime.
to
Yeah, so
us,
I can
to
get
me?
that. Sure.
Just from a fact standpoint, okay,
Yes.
so probably summer. Okay, so now we're looking at probably 2.5 years.
Yeah,
of
I will
time.
definitely get the date
Okay.
of the lease. I'll give you a copy of the lease. And in the lease, it talks about signage.
Good,
I
okay,
could do
okay.
that.
So it very much sounds like it kind of takes us back to what kind of action we can take as a commission. And I still think that tabling it for an extended period of time is the most appropriate course of action. Can we do this? I think we've had a lot of conversation here. So in order to kind of take a next step, Commissioner Tannenbaum, would you mind excusing or recusing yourself rather
Sure.
from the vote?
Like, walk away? Okay.
While he's doing that, are you in the middle of making a motion, Matthew?
Yes, but I'm happy to put a sock in it and let you talk.
I think just a point of clarification, I had the benefit of talking to Jake Welch, the zoning officer, about this particular issue, but I think the complication to be mindful of as the HRC is there's really two things happening here. First, there's a sign permit, whether or not this was a designated district or not, but any sign that's installed throughout the city is required to obtain a sign permit, which would be reviewed for certain things like Kevin mentioned. Is it attached securely to the building? Is it the right height or size? And the other parameters that they would look at signage. And so if under normal circumstances where this is not a designated structure, then in this situation, the property owner would have been notified to install a sign. Without a sign permit, you have to come in and go through the process, get the sign permit, have it inspected, and then they would either issue the permit or not. The stumbling block here is that because it is a locally designated asset, now it also requires that before that permit is issued, it now requires a certificate of appropriateness by the HRC. So just kind of keep that in mind that the sign permit, I believe, and Heather, you can confirm or deny, the sign permit is being held up then because of the complications of not having a COA process or even an application for a certificate of appropriateness in place. So there's really no place for them to check that box saying, yes, it has received a certificate of appropriateness, or no, it was denied, and therefore the permit would technically be denied. So just wanted to make that clarification, and that perhaps another question is to go back to the zoning officer and say what happens with the sign permit. Can that be on hold until the HRC then also makes a determination of how to handle the certificate of appropriateness process that isn't really defined yet?
Yeah.
Just wanted to clarify that a little bit.
Kathy, thank you for clarifying that. On Jake Welch's letter to the owner of PACA, that is definitely spelled out in there, that it did not seek the appropriate application for signage, and that in order for them to sign off, they, per section 103 of the zoning ordinance, issuance of all permits and certificates are required. So that is correct what you stated. Now, the question might be, is if we table, is there a time limit, and I don't know this answer, is there a time limit that the zoning, chief zoning officer has with the application in terms of signage that, requires us to have a 30-day turnaround or whatever? So I don't know that answer.
It probably doesn't exist because this has never happened before. Right?
Okay.
So this, the sign permit process, absent a COA review, would have followed the normal process. Not getting a permit, the property owners notified or cited, comply, or if they don't, then they have to move forward. So it sounds like Martin did comply and went in and did apply for the permit after the fact, but that sometimes that happens because of all the reasons we discussed. But now the CLA doesn't, there's a gap.
Right.
Because that process really does not exist yet. So I think, and I would suggest that tabling it is appropriate, but it gives you time to kind of contemplate, can you create, and maybe even ask the solicitor's his advice. If you create something from whole cloth that didn't exist, how does that impact this process? The only thing that exists is that it was supposed to happen, because the ordinance said it was supposed to happen, but there was procedurally nothing that was there to, there's no application, there's no fee, so that part didn't exist, just the ordinance language. So I think it's probably an ask of the solicitor or guidance here, as well as the agency taking it back up in some period of time. I don't think that you'll have an issue with delaying the permit because of this issue needs to be clarified. I don't think that'll be a problem. There's not probably a time limit, but I might want to just double check with Jake on that. I want to confuse things. Just want to make a little distinction here.
No, that's really helpful. And I want to, I know we've been talking a lot about procedure and kind of purview, and I want to take it all the way back to aesthetics. So when we're looking at an individual landmark, we want to ensure that the contributing features are what's most important. And in this case, the sign is obstructing leaded glass windows. And so I think what's important when the applicant comes back before us is to see what kind of impact this sign has had on that feature. It's not possible to tell from this application, but we don't know how the sign is affixed to the building itself. If there are screws that were put into mortar joints, or if they were put into the stonework, if there's any damage that was done, to those leaded glass windows, those are the sorts of things that really fall within our purview to look at. I'm not as concerned about, I would say not as nearly as concerned about the ability to be able to remove the sign as I am about what kind of impact it's had, like on the resource itself. So it would be wonderful if you could work with the applicant to get some clarity there. I think in the meantime, there needs to be, I think as we've kind of uncovered, lots of conversations need to happen. So why don't we give ourselves kind of ample time and table this actually until our October meeting. And that's not to say the applicant could come back at an earlier date. Come back either next month if they're ready to, or in 2 months if they're ready to, with a full application. But by, I think, our October meeting, it would be good to have some kind of either application or status report on kind of where things are at, so that we can either carry this forward or make a decision on what course of action to take.
Okay,
How does
that's
that?
I
I second your motion.
Well,
do you want to state the motion again for clarity?
I will, and I'll make it really simple. I went to the address of PACA. Thank you. So I move that we table the application for 1505 State Street until our October hearing.
Second?
I second that.
Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? None. This passes.
Thank you. Can we invite the commissioner back? Thank you.
And are we ready to adjourn?
Yes.
No.
Oh.
RFP.
Yes.
Wait until Jackie gets back.
Linda, you had another item for the agenda?
Yes, so the last item on the agenda, well, the last item, which is not on the agenda, but we know it's pressing, is the RFP for the Citywide Historic Resource Survey. So if we could, yes, thank you.
I'll start and you'll finish. And we have Kathy here who's been working on the RFP. Kathy, maybe you want to take the lead on this one. I know that you and Heather have been working together to finalize the RFP, and the hope is that that will be finalized by the end of the week. I know that. Do you want to talk a little bit about your conversation with the state and some of the edits that you included since you proposed the RFP to the council?
Sure.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for asking. We've been, working on the edits, mostly in response to what the direction that the AHRC had given us at our couple of meetings ago, a couple months ago. We then sent the RFP to the State Historic Preservation Office for their comment. Bill Callahan, as you may know, has been out on medical leave, and he's usually our go-to on things like this. But we really were asking for not only their review of the RFP in its entirety, but we needed to get the terminology for the way that the survey is collected. Of course, everything is now digital, which is wonderful, but they were going to give us that language. It took us a while to get a response, and I know they're busy and short of staff, so it was understandable. Heather and I met with Elizabeth Schultz and Elizabeth Rary last Tuesday, I think it was. And the only outstanding item right now is the language for the survey collection methodology. So we are still waiting on that from them before it's finalized. I think the Easter holiday probably delayed their response. So hopefully we'll get that by tomorrow, and that should be final. I know there are a few more updates. The language from the sort of the city boilerplate language that they want to see needs to also be included, but it should be ready to move forward. They did give us some really great direction, particularly with timing and scheduling of the phasing of the project, because there are 3 different funding sources for this project, and the CLG funding is the first to come due. There's a deadline in September, but we're going to use that for public engagement anyway, so they felt like we could front load public engagement on this process and get that funding spent in time to meet those deadlines. So happy to ask any specific questions you might have, and we'll share a draft with you when it's finalized. It's just not finalized just yet.
Okay.
Thank you, Kathy. That was the request, ultimately, is if the HRC would still have the opportunity to review, because I know you're moving quickly, and the goal is really to get it out as soon as possible, maybe even by the end of this week. Is it appropriate, because of the timeline, because of when the RFP needs to be published, that we kind of discuss now how comments are shared? Because I want to be clear, because of the timeline, the commission may see the RFP and need to provide comment even before our May 6th meeting. So I want to make sure that if we are collecting comment by email, that's publicly stated, all of the commissioners agree to that, and we can do that.
That would be fine and preferable, because I think waiting until May is too late.
Yeah.
And it's really because, we have to get the RFP issued, have to have enough time for firms to respond and be competitive. I think this will be an extremely competitive project, so we'll see lots of responses, but we do want to give them time to put together a proposal. And now we're up against the clock with the CLG. There might be some wiggle room to extend that deadline. Elizabeth wasn't going to commit that she would extend it, but there is some wiggle room Jackie. I'm fine with getting email responses, and we can certainly send it out now so you can kind of see the framework, but there'll just be those sections that have not had the SHPO edits incorporated. I'm not sure what all those would be. They could have added more than just the survey collection for the fall.
Kathy, that's a great overview. So just for the HRC to clarify, there's different phases for this project. And one of the phases of the project that pertains to community input, surveys, dialogue with community members at large, we have slated a particular grant funding source that needs to be spent and completed by, I believe it's the end of September. So that's kind of the level of urgency here. And so I'm thinking that what should happen, just because Kathy has invested and done the work on the document, I put in my ideas and comments, Jackie's looked at it. We've met with the state this week from SHPO, the two Elizabeths, for their input. And as I understand it, Kathy, you're still waiting back from Elizabeth Rarig and her, because there is specific language to match up with the phasing and the way that the survey has to be administered and taken. So perhaps what can happen, Kathy, maybe you could send me the most recent version of what I sent you Thursday last week, my green line markups. If you could send me the document, I'd be happy to forward that document to the HRC. And then if HRC members could make edits to that Word document or send me in text or in email text response to the document specifying, like what page. Maybe we'll set the deadline by the end of the day Thursday, so that Friday morning when we walk in, that's there, and Kathy and I can go ahead and finalize what needs to be finalized to get it sent out. Because considering the deadline, September, August, July, June, May, that's about a 5-month work time, and it's during the summer. So while that can be advantageous in one sense, sometimes summer isn't the best time for surveys and community input. So it can sort of be seen different ways. But that's kind of just how I see it unfolding from an efficiency standpoint. Kathy, do you have any comment on that timeline or turnaround?
That absolutely works for me.
Great. Maybe back to HRC. I don't know if anyone has any comment or ideas for that, or if that sounds fine.
I have no questions at this point. Any questions, Melissa?
No, so the deadline is, so it'll be shared relatively soon or quickly, I would guess. And then our role is really to provide comment by the end of the day, Thursday, April 4th. And we will provide that via email so that you have an actual record of our comment. And then you'll go forth. If you don't mind, just let us know when it actually gets published, because I think it would be helpful for us to just have a heads up when it actually goes live.
Absolutely. We will.
Just going to mention that you have to wait to, I know Kathy said she didn't get the edits yet from the state.
That's correct.
That's kind of where the holdup is at
Right.
the moment. So you may have to wait a few days. So if you can't make the Thursday deadline, we'll just move into next week, right? I mean, because depending on when the state edits come in, they might not come in till Thursday. Who knows?
Right. Well, you
So-
tell us,
Yeah,
right?
we'll tell you when you need to respond back. But
And maybe is it possible that we could send the draft as it is
Well,
prior
that's-
to the state input this week, in
That's-
the event that the state doesn't get back until next week, and then we're just waiting on the state incorporating the state comments?
I think that's a better
Okay.
scenario.
So it sounds like Kathy will send me the draft as it stands today, because I know she's made edits since last Thursday, Friday. And I will forward the draft to HRC members. If you can I'll do that this afternoon. If you can get comments back to me by Thursday, end of the day, so that Friday morning, then it's up to Kathy and I to finalize the document with any state input that might come in after that fact. I think that might be the proper sequence, just to
expedite the process and hope it goes out next week.
Well, and ultimately, the PA SHPO, whatever language they request, has to be in there, so.
Has to be upheld. Correct.
Yes.
All set? Okay, that was the last time on the agenda and added to the agenda. Would someone make a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Aye.
Those in favor?
Hi.
Those opposed? No. Thank you, everybody. Okay,